All right then. I think everybody knows the routine with raising your hand and waiting to be addressed. Um, Anybody got any comments, questions, ideas, suggestions? Stan.
Yes, Tagore, when you were talking about people saying, I'm an Armstrong Christian, I am German Christian, was that what the church in Corinth was doing in First Corinthians when they were saying things like, I am of Cephas, I am of Paul, I am of Apollo? Were they doing that same practice that you were referring to? I'm done.
Yes, Stan. Pretty much the same spiritual algebra is playing out. So you're taking Paul plus Christ or Apollos plus Christ. You're putting plus. That plus is devil actually. You're very right. I mean same things. Thank you.
Chris?
Hey, so Tagore, when you said in the beginning in 1 John 2, you said an old commandment which you had from the beginning, and you referenced it to John 1. Are you saying that doesn't reference to Genesis 1:1?
He himself is clarifying in John 5, 2 John, what he meant, the commandment that you have from the beginning is you love one another. He interpreted himself for us.
All right, because when I read this, that if you hate your brother, and when it talks about in the beginning, that's telling me Cain and Abel. That's not telling me John 1:1. That's saying because Cain slew Abel because he first thought evil, and then he did evil, and he's saying that hatred. Right now, you love your brother. I'm not seeing the very stark difference between the old and the new here. So when I see in the beginning, and when it's talking about hating your brother, it always brings to mind Cain and Abel to me. And that first sin, that first murder, was drawn up because of envy, because of covetousness, right? So it seems to me that maybe Yeshua was reminding people that to follow the spirit of the law, not really introducing, the spirit of the law, but because I think it was always there.
That's you can build a case for that. You're right, Chris. I don't either agree or disagree. You can build a case, but the way he quoted is you have to love one another. He's quoting that even though he's talking about he who claims to be in light but hates his brother. So earlier discussions, we have discussed the brother. The word brother is no longer flesh. Flesh relationships are going away. Cain and Abel are brothers, even though they were given to us as a shadow. He says, like, who is my brother? Who is my mother and sister? He who does the will of my Father in heaven. So they are no longer flesh relationships. It's a spirit relationships. So those things are kind of making me to conclude the other way, that he is referring to Christ's new commandment that Christ gave us. You have to love one another. So, but you're right again. Right. I don't want to take a hard stand this way or that way. But I think I'm leaning towards this. You're leaning towards the other. I'm fine with that.
Right. So I don't mean to insinuate that we don't have a new covenant, that there's not new stuff, that the law is not expanded, but because it is the new covenant is something new. But the loving your neighbor is a quote from Leviticus 19:18, and so the Torah is always, it wasn't meant to be applied hyper literally. So when it says you can't covet your neighbor's wife, that doesn't mean you can covet your neighbor's iPhone, right? It doesn't mean that. I mean, he's just giving examples of, dear things that you're not supposed to covet. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I know what you're saying. No problem, no disagreements. I love you, brother.
Love you too, man. Love you, man.
Reinhardt?
Yeah, hi guys, and Tagore, thanks a lot for the presentation. Appreciate it. What you mentioned about the new covenant and sort of the infinite scope of applying the law. It reminds me of what our Savior was saying in Matthew 5, where he says, "I didn't come to destroy, but to fulfill the law." And what I was thinking is when I looked at that word, what it says to fulfill, it actually means to sort of expand on it, to make it bigger, to make it, it says here, to make full, to fill up, to fill to the full, to cause to abound, to furnish or supply liberally. So it's really an expansion, not just staying strictly to the letter of the law, but also using the spirit of the law, which means we learn how to apply the principles to all kinds of situations that we may be confronted with. So that's just a comment, basically supporting what you were saying. Another thing that you mentioned about lukewarm, and you're probably making a reference there to Revelation 3, to the Laodicean church there. I know we have heard many times that he wants us to be hot or cold, meaning it's better not to believe in him at all than to believe in him with all our heart, soul, and mind. What I think when I read all the verses connected to this in what follows, he says, I want you to be either hot or cold, and I don't want you to be lukewarm. In the following verses, then he says, because you say I'm rich, have become wealthy, and have need of nothing, and so on. In other words, he's saying you guys are comfortable. And when I think about lukewarm, let's say if we take a lukewarm shower, it's comfortable. But a hot shower is invigorating, and a cold shower is also invigorating. So hot and cold are both invigorating. They give life. They put us outside of our comfort zone. We get into a situation where we learn, where we grow. We don't grow in our comfort zone being lukewarm. So that's sort of the meaning that I have come to understand just recently. And I just wanted to share that with you here.
Thank you, Reinhardt. Appreciate very much. I lean towards your explanation more over the years. We were told hot is good and cold is not good. And that's the traditional explanation. So you have to be hot. But the whole paradigm, this is in support of what you just spoke. We're talking about mouth and hot and cold liquids or foods. Both are invigorating, hot or cold. But the lukewarm, especially water or drink, people just don't. They loathe that and they spit it out. So the phrase, I will spit you out of my mouth. So either you have hot or you are cold, but not lukewarm. So if you take both of them are positive things, good, desirable things, both are represented by Christ. So you have, if he is coming to you as a hot, then you are probably cold. And when you encounter with him, there's a lukewarmness. Or if he's coming to you as a cold and you are hot, then you encounter with him, you end up in lukewarm. So that is another way, another approach to what you are saying. But nevertheless, there is some reaction to truth. Your reaction to truth, either indifference or opposing or whatever way, that lands you in this lukewarm state. I don't know if you agree with me. I go along with you, but this is how I approach now. I did not have this approach like 5 years ago. Just like you are growing, I think I'm growing. Appreciate your comment.
Yeah, thank you.
Sandra?
I was trying to listen to what Stan was saying. So at the same time, I was putting my thought that I want to state here together on paper as to not offend or to make myself clear. I'm back at the slide, algebra, spiritual algebra plus or minus. It's sort of a miss not to, in our position, being we all consider ourselves independents, which we are, according to what you wrote there. We are of Christ. We're not of all the beliefs of the independents, or not to say we don't have none of the beliefs of the group churches like United. But I don't want to be called by who I associate with. I listen, and I have learned over the years, and I'm still learning from lots of Christians in different places and associations. And so I am Christ, like you put there, Christ plus nothing. So another line you could add in there, because of the group of people here, is I am not an independent Christian plus Christ. You know, we're just of Christ, and without making the they and us distinction. Let's see, I have something else written. Every group or individual has some truth. I see that, you know, as I associate with people. Oh, I learned such deep truths from people, no matter what group they associate with. But they don't, these same individuals or groups don't have all truth. And we've seen that also, you know, we all have experienced that. And it's because we are all growing in the truth, you know, so it's all in honor of Christ. And when I associate with maybe the I don't know what word I hate to call them, the organized churches of God, I see in what I'm saying here flaws, and when I'm associating with the independents, I see that same flaw, that same what's against that slide you put up there. You know, you're not Christ plus nothing. You know, and for sure each individual in any of the groups, even the independent groups, don't agree on everything. You know, no matter what group you're in, there's not full agreement. I'm finished.
I want to add some clarification. Christ plus nothing should be the ideal state. That's a spiritual, theological position that you are holding, your doctrinal position that you are holding. Christ and Christ alone, his teachings.
Right.
But for Christ's teachings, you need all the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation.
Right.
But Christ, it's theological statement that I was referring to. Either you say you are American or you say you are Christian in different contexts. When you come to spiritual, doctrinal, theological position, you should hold that position that you are Christian, Christ. In another context, if you are talking to a person of other nationalities, you could say, I'm an American, or you are a Mexican. That's fine. But when you make a theological statement of your spiritual standing, you must have Christ plus nothing, Christ. That's what I mean. That's what my understanding is.
Right. So back to what I said, you can't say, here I'm looking up at it. I'm a Baptist Christian. I'm an Armstrong Christian. And as we relate to each other here as independents, we can't say, connect that word independent with who we are, because it's not who we are. I agree with so much of everyone on here, but not everything. And the same thing when I associate with others. So to add to that list, you can't say I'm an independent Christian because you're Christ plus nothing. I don't want to be called what else is up there? Oh, an Armstrong Christian or a Baptist, or I guess the one that's the least hard to accept is non-denominational. But really, I think it stands the way you put it up there. It's Christ plus nothing. It's just what we know from the Bible, what we can know, and everybody is doing their own process of growth and learning exactly what it all means.
Yeah, you are very right. We don't know it all, but that is where we want to go. We're talking about our standing before Father, God the Father. This is where we want to stand, in Christ and Christ alone. But
Right.
if somebody, your neighbor, asks you, like, which church do you attend? Probably you will say such a church. That's a different context. But we are talking about the context before God the Father, your theological, spiritual standing. Christ and his teachings alone, that box the foundation. I think we're saying same thing.
Yeah, but the way you said that at the beginning really played it out what I'm saying. Now I can't remember what your words were at the beginning of this statement. I associate with who I'm comfortable with and where I grow. If I were on here and I weren't growing from what I'm learning, I didn't agree with most, a lot of, if it was more disagreement, I wouldn't be on here. You know who, everybody is where they belong and where they grow. It's almost as if Christ, when Worldwide split up, it felt like Christ put us each in our own groups where it was best for us. So, something like that. But I don't associate. There are some groups. Oh, I know what I was going to say when you said that. There are some groups I'm not comfortable fellowshipping with because too much disagreement with how they function as a Christian and what they teach, and I wouldn't grow in that atmosphere. So we each are in the place where we will grow. I'm finished. Finished.
One of the things I like that Tim Lindholm said many years ago is we're not independent groups, we are interdependent. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and we depend on one another. Willard?
Yeah, it came to mind while Sandra was talking. About 30 years ago, I bought a house in a nice little subdivision. And we were moving in, and the neighbors were so nice. They brought us over, loaves of bread, cookies, cakes, all kinds of stuff. this one fellow from down the street comes up to me and he sticks his hand out and he says, "Hello, my name is Jim and I'm from the Baptist faith." I says, "Hello, Jim. Good to meet you. I'm a Christian." Man avoided me like a plague. Then
Chris?
So I think that the struggle here is that we have to have adjectives. So when there was a Reformation, they started sifting through doctrines, and then they're like, okay, we really need to be baptized by immersion. Okay, we really don't need to do all these Catholic things. And so then as people start dividing up and finding truth, they start putting that truth on the side of their buildings, right? Presbyterian church has to deal with church governance, right? You know, and so on and so forth. So the difficulty comes is that doctrines put us in boxes. And Armstrong in the 1920s and 30s had it pretty good. That's a pretty good set of doctrines right there, right? But when you start putting up those doctrines, they box you in and they make you, you know, part of this group. And when you're in the group, you can't challenge the doctrine anymore, so you can't grow. And when you're outside of the group, you have to swallow that whole doctrinal pill in order to join the group. And so by independent, which just means that we're kind of free, you know, because I learned about this Church of God stuff in an independent group that was really wide open and free. So I don't have the baggage, but the, you know, it's difficult to explain to somebody. So if you go to my website, it's called firstcenturychristianity.net, right? First century Christian or messianic believer, because I'm trying to convey that we're trying to get back to the faith once delivered to the saints. But if you ask a Baptist, and they are going to tell you that they are doing that too, right? So the challenge is that we have to have a way of identifying ourselves as a contrast to the rest of Christianity. And that difficulty with that it becomes us versus them very quickly, and these doctrines start dividing up. So, you know, I'm seeing what Tagore was saying as far as salvational is that we just have to have Yeshua as our, you know, foundation, as our faith, and we point everything to him. How did he understand the Sabbath? How did he understand envy? How did he understand compassion? If we focus on that and then let our faith come from that foundation, then all the pieces are going to, you know, fall where they may. But how do you explain that one in an elevator to somebody in 20 seconds? You can't do it. So, and next, thank you.
John?
Yeah, if I understand what's been said so far, we only have Christ and so on, but I think 1 Corinthians 1:12 kind of disagrees. It says, he says, "Now I say, that every one of you say that I am of Paul." To me, what that's saying, I'm going to just listen to Paul. I'm not going to pay much attention to anybody else. And I'm of Apollos. And I understand that the same way, that Apollos got all the truth, and I'm not going to pay attention to Paul or Matthew or anything else. And I of Cephas or Peter, the same, and I am of Christ. Well, you'd think that'd be perfect, but not in this text. What he said, what these people are saying, I'm only going to believe what Christ said, and I'm not going to believe of anybody that Christ sent, like Paul or Cephas or Apollos. I'm not going to believe them that Christ sent. So I think here is just seems to be covering the whole spectrum. If Christ sent them, well, I think we're supposed to listen to them. And I think getting back to Christian, just Christian, a Christian is an imitator of Christ. And I've heard a lot of people say Sunday Christians. Well, to me, I think Sunday Christians and the Easter Bunny got a lot in common. Neither one exists, because you can't be an imitator of Christ and not observe the Sabbath. So I think people throw that term Christian around pretty loosely. I think if you stick to just the definition that's in the Bible or even the dictionary, I believe, is it's an imitator of Christ. So I think Willard, I agree with him when he said, I'm a Christian. Well, that'll scare most Roman religion people away because they don't really imitate Christ. So I'm done.
Sandra?
I'm looking back at what I said, and I said those exact words. I said, let me read the words here. Everything in any of the groups I associate with, I put, I am a Christian. That was part of what I said. And that's where I don't like when we become exclusive in the way we treat each other, that they and us is one way to describe it. Or 1 Corinthians 1:12 is actually for 20 years, that's what I have come to my mind and what I stand by, you know, how the Bible is correcting you there. The words of Christ are correcting you to say, not say, I'm of Paul, I'm of Cephas. That's always one of my it was a growth statement because it was so different for my first, what would it be, 25 years in the church till 1995. You know, in Worldwide Church of God, we were way too exclusive, way too much. And that's where I feel probably my largest area of growth since 1995. I learned that God is working with all people and that we don't have to separate ourselves. I agree with everything Willard said, because he was saying, you know, it's when you start adding these adjectives. But where I sort of agreed with Chris, when he used the way he felt when he came into the independent groups, he used the word free. He felt free. Well, that's separate than being Christian, but he wouldn't phrase it as I'm a free Christian. He's just saying when I'm associating with independent or these groups, I feel free to grow, a freedom of, you know, to be able to grow where I need to. So I don't think if I said anything else, I'd just be repeating myself. It's got to do with exclusiveness in the way we look at others in or out of the church.
Worldwide was brought up a couple of times in other churches and their backgrounds and things. When Worldwide broke up back in 95 and everything started going haywire and going to pieces, and people were like, why? A lot of pain and agony at the time and confusion and people being upset. And it was like, why? And other groups have gone through breakups too, where they've gone different ways or they've fragmented. And basically God's breaking down the walls of the box. And I liken it to an analogy that I came up with when Worldwide was breaking up. The church or the corporate church or whatever is a terrarium. Everyone has a terrarium, we put plants in it, and the plants grow. The problem with the group was you had cactus in with, you know, like a palm, in with a jade, and you have all these different plants with all these different needs in the same environment. So everyone was alive, you know, all the plants were there, they were growing a little bit, but they were surviving. But nobody was really growing except for maybe the philodendrons. You know, they go great in a terrarium. But so God steps back, says, "Okay, it's time to grow. Satan, get him." Terrarium goes off the end of the table, bang, smashed on the floor, plants all over the place. Now God can grab and take that cactus and put it in tight, dry soil and direct sunlight, and it grows. Or he can take a cast iron plant and put it in the dark. You know, all the different plants now God can move where they'll grow. And as they grow, they propagate, making more plants to go out and to do things. So, you know,
What you're actually talking about is the parable of the tares, and they're growing together. And in worldwide, or even now in any group, or everybody's at different spiritual levels or different levels of growth. And one minister taught me I have to love all people. I questioned somebody who seemed to not be growing, and he said God's giving him time to correct him on that. Accept everyone at their level of growth, or whether they're a tare or what you're going through right now.
well, the tear eventually is pulled up and destroyed. What
Yeah,
I'm talking about is taking all these plants, they're all God's people, and transplanting them to where they will grow. Some plants do great in a terrarium. You know, they're not going to do well in a non-structured environment, or, you know, I hate saying corporate, the traditional churches. They thrive in that environment. Some of us don't do well in that environment. So when we run into a trial, and it's, you know, we can look at it as pruning, or we can look at it as God's moving you closer to an environment where you'll prosper. It's a good thing. It hurts. You know, when a plant gets ripped out of its, you know, ripped out of the soil and thrown around, it takes a little while for it to recover. It hurts.
so
But
in the parable of the tares, what does it say about the ones who are not a tare, who are growing the plants? It's a parable of comparing everybody's level of growth.
well, it's you got the good and the bad together. The good is taken out and is used, and the bad is removed and destroyed.
Right.
Anyways, that was my lame example. Alan?
I would like to remind us all that there's an old commandment, because it's been 60 years since they received the commandment of Christ, and all his words were received approximately 60 years before this letter was written. So when we hear something that was taught 60 years ago, and the person says to you, "I'm not telling you something new. I'm telling you something you heard in the beginning of your walk. And when you first started, when you were first illuminated, when you first came to the knowledge of God and you were called and you began to obey him, and then you came into covenant, that was 60 years ago. I'm not telling you something new." This is why I would say this is not talking about the commandment at Sinai. This is talking about something that happened 60 years earlier and is no longer considered a new commandment. But another reason I would say is, if you go back to Leviticus 19 and look at the word love there, it is inferior to the love that we have, that Christ is giving when he says, "I give you a new commandment." Now, if we turn over to John 15 and we read there where he's giving them a new commandment, to love one another, it's a different love than the love of Leviticus 19, if that makes sense. The Leviticus 19 love is, let me read this to you. It's It's a have, and it is to love your family, sexual love, human appetite for food, to love sleeping, and to love wisdom, human level love towards God. So we see a stark contrast between this love and the love that he's spoken of in his new commandment, where he says in John 13:34, I'm giving you a new commandment, that you love one another. So when we read that it's not a new commandment, but one that you heard from the beginning, he's talking about the one you heard when Christ was preaching. It's a superior level compared to the agape love that's been discussed here tonight. So I hope that adds a little spice to the mix. But before I go off here, I wanted to mention about belief and the idea that our faith, which Abraham believed, and it was synonymous with faith. But faith is a gift. So we're given the gift of faith in a small measure, and it's up to us what we do with that. There was a man in the New Testament who had a son that was violently acting. Let's see what it says here. It says, Mark 9. And I'm in 24. Oftentimes he is cast into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if you can do anything, please have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. Straightway the father of the child cried out loud, said with tears, Lord, I do believe, but help thou my unbelief. So he's in a stage of belief, but it's not strong faith. It's a faith that needs help and it needs growth. So help thou my unbelief. We should not be embarrassed or reluctant to ask for help for our unbelief. Because none of us have perfect faith. None of us are able to stand alone with what faith we have. And it's accounted to us as righteousness because as he went through that material already tonight, as it was for Abraham. And it evokes your actions afterwards, which produce fruit. But because we don't have perfect faith, we need help with our unbelief. I think we're plagued with that. We're not strong all the time in faith. That faith that was given to us as a gift in the beginning. So we grow it, and we grow it year by year. And this man cried out for help as an example to us, that we should cry out as well. Help my unbelief. Help the part of me in my faith that's still weak. So I just found it interesting as we see that our faith gives us the accounting of righteousness, but at the same time, it needs a lot of help. And there's only one place we can go for that help. I'm done.
All right, space bar. There it goes. Go ahead, Chris.
Screen grabbing. So there's a nifty translation that we can get, and I have to put my readers on. You know how we were talking about Bob Newhart earlier? Right. So I got to put my readers on because I know who Bob Newhart is. The Apostles Bible Polyglot is a map. It's a map for the Old Testament into Greek. If you get this on your eSword, it gives you the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation in Greek, and this is the Septuagint. So so when Alan said the word for love in Leviticus 19 is ahab, because that's the Hebrew word for love, he's right. But if we switch to Septuagint, and we will see it's the same word as we're talking about in the New Testament. G25 agapao. Agapeo. So it's the same love, same thing. And if we read the context of it, which I'll go to my favorite, right? You have to read the whole thing, right? It's not just a standalone verse. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor leave the gleaning of your harvest. You shall leave that for the needy and the stranger. That's pretty loving. You don't steal, you don't deal falsely, you don't lie to one another. That's pretty loving. You don't swear falsely by my name so as to profane the name of your Elohim. I'm Yahweh. Yeah, there you go. No oppressing your neighbor. The wages of a hired man don't remain with you all night. You shall not curse a deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall revere your Elohim. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great. You are to judge your neighbor fairly. You shall not slander your people. And you don't act against the life of your neighbor. I am Yahweh. And you shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but you shall not incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's pretty comprehensive, my friends.
Alan?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I don't believe it can be equal, we can't use an equal sign between those, even though the Septuagint does do that, is well, first of all, he says it's a new commandment, so it's not the same one. If it was, he would just simply say, it is written, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, and this is also my commandment. But instead he says, I have a new commandment. I want you to love your neighbor as yourself. But he didn't leave it there. He said, greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friend. So he spikes it up quite high. We don't find that in Leviticus. Nowhere is it stated, by the way, you should lay your life down for your brethren. So he puts a higher standard on it. I believe maybe that's why he's calling it new in John 13. He's adding additional standard to it and making it a more difficult category of love. So I don't think that we have an equal sign between the two. I think it's still a new one. It's still something new that's being given, because he actually says it's new.
I hear you, but they broke all of these, right? When they were putting him to death, right?
Yes.
And so all these matter. And it's Exodus 32:32, where Moses laid down his eternal life for the people. And when Yeshua was a prophet like unto Moses, he actually did it. Moses didn't actually get that bluff called. He says, hey, if you're going to slay them, Yahweh, go ahead and slay me too. So I'm not one to say that we don't need the New Testament or something, because I know that there's people who believe similar to me that start saying that they're like it's not a new covenant. But I'm just saying that in my studies, if it's in this area, it's pretty comprehensive, and so it isn't as black and white as we can often perceive it to be. Meaning, okay, you just had to do these Torah things and you were good. It's showing here in Leviticus 19 how to love your neighbor is very darn similar to the New Testament definition of the same concept.
So, Chris, then when he says in John 13:34, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another, What do you think was new about it?
I have to. I'm wondering, does he say it new in both places? But how do you understand it? How do you understand? How do you love your neighbor? If you just take his word right there and say all you have to do is love your neighbor, it's a new commandment, and you stop and you don't reference the Old Testament, how do you define loving your neighbor? Is it different from Leviticus 19?
In the Hebrew, yes.
No, I mean practicality, in a practical sense, right?
In the spirit, yes,
if you-
it's different. It's different for them because, see, they did not have the Spirit of the living God
Yes,
dwelling in
yes,
them
they did. Yes, they
to
did.
guide them.
Yes, they did.
Okay,
Yeah.
then that's
yeah.
a whole different discussion.
Yeah. You got to go. That's
Very
another.
few.
That's another one that's kind of like, oh, they didn't have the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. Just throughout this week, just look up Spirit everywhere it shows up in the Old Testament, and you'll be shocked, right? But this is where the rubber meets the road, right? Is that when he says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? If you don't have the Old Testament, how do you define loving your neighbor?
So then we have to conclude that they were spiritually driven or spiritually motivated people the same as we are. So there's no difference really between us and the ancient nation.
So
I don't believe that.
no, I mean, no, I'm asking you if because this is where Sunday Christians or mainstream Christianity is. They say all I got to do is love my neighbor and I'm in, right? How do you love your neighbor? Well, then you don't condemn them of being trans, because that would be hateful. I mean, then you open up this Pandora's box to where loving your neighbor can be defined without any framework, without any foundation. But if you take the love your neighbor and you go back to Leviticus 19:18, it gives you a very comprehensive foundation for how to love your neighbor.
It does give guidelines, you're right, but I still believe that when we come into the new covenant, the guidelines are far more expanded and much higher bar is set than the ones that you read earlier.
So okay, but just, I don't have to answer now, but we're buddies. You email me, call me. I'm just curious, because when I was trying to figure that out, right? When I was trying to figure out, okay, love your neighbor. Okay, what does that mean? Who's my neighbor is usually the first thing that comes up, and how do I do it? And
yeah, well, you got the Good Samaritan example there that we did not see that kind of thing being preached by Moses. What we saw was what you read in Leviticus. So was Christ giving this example of the Good Samaritan because they already had it from the beginning, that someone would go to that great extent? Or was that some kind of like a greater, more high level application of loving the neighbor? I would say it was an excellent way to describe how to love your neighbor that was not really given in the past before that. That's why he gave it.
Except that hospitality is also, it's taking, when Abraham fed the angels, right? So the hospitality aspect of it is there, and the hating your brother is there. So it's not, it just, if you figure out, I think you're right as far as expanding it, but there's no way that it contradicts what's in Leviticus 19.
No, not contradict. No.
Right.
Just has a far more excellent application, a spiritual level application, where the things that were mentioned in Leviticus were more like, okay, I can do this. Just anybody could do it. Even a guy who doesn't really believe in the Bible could do those things. And
I don't think so. I don't think that if I just look across the street from my house, there's a huge cornfield that they just ripped every possible crumb out of that field, because man's inclination is to maximize profits and maximize yield, right? Here, the Torah says when you reap the harvest of your land, you don't reap to the very corners, that you leave something back in case some stranger comes by and might be hungry.
Yeah, but they had to be told to do it because they wouldn't naturally do that. You see, they're just like your field across the street. They were that way.
Okay.
So they had to be told, here, here's a rule for you. You need to leave something behind for those who are needy. And the rule has to be set down because you're not naturally going to do that.
Okay. So do you think that a person who has the Holy Spirit today would naturally not do that without the I'm not getting it. Without the commandment?
Well, I think that people who are spiritually minded care about each other far more than those who are not spiritually minded. Of course, to love your brother as yourself, he takes it to the level of laying your life down. And,
Right.
that's a pretty high level.
Right, but Moses did that too.
Yeah, but
Right.
Moses wasn't the people. Moses was a very special case, as were the prophets.
Yeah.
As were, many others who were called to special assignments. But the general population, no, I don't believe that. That's why those things were given to them, right? So that they could survive and be a model nation. Because without writing it down and making it a hard and fast rule, you're not going to do it because you don't really care.
Yeah, man, that's not how I read the Old Testament. That they were all just a bunch of like automatons who had to be told what to do, exactly what to do. And that when you get to the New Testament, we don't need to be told exactly what to do, right? Because there's gray in both of those paradigms, right? Granted, the Old Testament believers, all we have is a history of bad, right? But then when you get there's a couple hundred years where they're good before Yeshua comes, but that's not, you could see that people in the New Testament needed to be taught stuff as well.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
it's not that. Yeah,
but
I'm
at
just
least
not,
but at least in the New Testament, we know that we're growing and we're learning and we're moving towards perfection. I don't see that happening in the ancient nation. They had a system that they were to adhere to, but it was not a system of growth, of spiritual growth and of maturity into, as Ephesians says, that you might grow up into him, into the fullness of the stature of Christ. It was not there at that time.
yeah, I'm not telling you the new covenant doesn't exist, right? So, but what I am saying is that the love your neighbor being some entirely new concept is something I don't agree with. But we're hogging it, so I'm going to shut up and let these other fellows with their hands up
Okay.
talk.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
John?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think I go along with what you're thinking. And I was right in the process, the same as you, was to see what the Bible that's quoted in the New Testament, what word they used. And you could beat me to it. It was agape. I think there was growth in the Old Testament. I think Abraham grew. You can find him even lying about his wife, was willing to sacrifice her, just save his own skin earlier. And then it moved on. He went through so much growth that he would even offer his own son Isaac. So there was growth. As far as new, could it be possible that he's talking about a new commandment? It's new to them. Personally, I wonder if you could read it that way, because it sure looks like it's nothing new if you look at scripture, like Chris just pointed out. But if you look at it new to them personally, it seems to all that would fit, So I'm done.
Yeah, I would like to respond at least. You're right. Abraham did grow immensely over the years, as did the other patriarchs. And we have to expect that all those who were called to be in special positions that would have the Holy Spirit in them. And in Peter, he says the Spirit of Christ that was in them, referring to the Old Testament prophets and others. So that select group, yes, of course they grew. And of course they were selected to be the heroes of faith. But those are specially selected people for special assignments. Now, on Pentecost, something new happened. He quotes Joel in the last days, I'll pour out my spirit on all flesh. It wasn't happening in the ancient nation. So although the patriarchs and the prophets did grow personally in their relationship with God, in their faith, absolutely. But that was not for the general public, in my opinion. And I would like to see if someone can find scriptural support that it was.
I think if you should go look for yourself, because I had the same perspective. And then when I went and looked for Ruach spirit in the Old Testament, I'm like, oh, and I had to shift gears, bro. So, yeah.
But even at Pentecost, it wasn't poured out on all flesh. It was those who the Father called. He said, "No one comes to me unless the Father calls him." And it was still dealing with the first fruit, and
Yeah.
and later on, it would be poured out onto all flesh. But at Pentecost, it wasn't the time that this was happening. It was
Right.
maybe a beginning.
It was the beginning of it being poured out.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. You're right. It's the beginning of it. But before that, it was not yet the beginning of it. So I'm going to do what Chris said. I'm going to go back and see if I can reframe my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, I'm coming back.
Yeah, I was thinking even the verse we were going in 1 Corinthians about I'm of Christ. Well, if you can imagine when he sent Elijah and Malachi and different prophets, and they wouldn't listen to him, and that's, I think, the context of what we're reading in 1 Corinthians there. I am of Paul, and if I'm of Christ, he's the context to me is saying you can't just divide like that. You gotta you think I'm of Christ, that's perfect. Well, it is if you listen to people that Christ sent, like in Jesus in the Old Testament, he sent Elijah, he sent Moses, he sent Malachi, so you best listen to them.
And those people had to be recognized.
Yeah, correct.
So it's not just, oh, here's this guy who could do all this stuff. The people had to recognize him. And so what mechanism did he use to keep the 7,000 people from bowing their knee to Baal?
Is that a question to me, Chris? I don't.
That was a rhetorical question to Alan, actually.
I'm real good on questions. Just answers I'm no good at.
Okay, are we done? Can I speak now? Put my hand down. Okay. I truly believe that they knew everything pretty much that we know today back in the Old Testament. It refers to the law and the statutes as being the schoolmaster. They had the rules, they had the example, they had everything, just like Chris is saying, it's all there. When the Corinthian church was saying, oh, we're giving grace to these people because he's living and he's married to his mother-in-law. Where did they know that that's wrong? It's in the Old Testament. It's there. That's the schoolmaster. See, then they realize, oh, yeah, I guess this isn't right. And because Jesus Christ had died and the price had been paid, they had the means now to keep those things. That's what's new. In the Old Testament, yeah, you had the Spirit. It was there. David prayed, Father, don't take the Spirit away from me. Obviously, the prophets had it. Obviously, there were people who had the Spirit, or the Spirit was with them, but it wasn't openly available to everybody until Christ came. Yes, it's all there. I truly believe that Abel was keeping the Passover. He was taking the lamb and he was doing what he was before it even was there. So it was there, it was the schoolmaster, and they didn't have the full means to keep it. They didn't have the helper, they didn't have the sacrifice. They were not complete. They had the human spirit, but they didn't have full access to the Holy Spirit. And without those two combined, you can't be a new creature. So I think that's what's new, is that, yes, it says, okay, if your wife, the one example they gave to the Pharisees, well, it says if you, man, you can give her a letter of divorcement and get away from your wife. Well, Christ responded, well, it's because of the hardness of your heart that we did these things. And the spirit of the matter is, you marry her, she's yours. You don't put her away. He amplified it. He raised it to the next level and explained why. Because of the hardness of your heart, because of what you've done, we had to do this. So I'm saying the new is that it is now possible to take it to the next level. And Jesus Christ was expanding it, saying, yes, this is what it said in the old, but now I'm going to take what you were taught in the old, the schoolmaster, and I'm going to elevate it. So yes, it was there. It was the guide. It was the standard. The standard's always been there. But now we have the ability to actually keep it. And I will shut up now. I'm done. Any other comments after my little rant? Oh, my mic's on. Tagore.
Yeah, we also talked about two phases of new righteousness: imputed righteousness for internal works and justified righteousness for external works. Are we good with that, or are there any questions or objections to that? I'm done.
John?
Yeah, I think there is some new stuff where there's judgments. I think Acts 15, the decision or judgment on circumcision. Like up till that time, if you go by the covenant, if you weren't circumcised, you didn't join in with the Passover meal. And maybe it had bearing on fellowship too, but with the judgment that come down in Acts 15, now somebody uncircumcised could participate in the Passover meal and so on. And there's other judgments that have come down to the 5 daughters were going to lose their inheritance, and the judgment came down that corrected that. There was the intent of the meeting was supposed to last through all generations, yet a judgment come down, it was changed to brick and mortar. I think there was also they could have wine and that, the Levites, while they were working until the strange fire come, and then a judgment come down, no drinking on the job. So I think Malachi covers this. He says, remember the law of Moses, my son, with its statutes, but also its judgments we have to keep in mind, like Acts 15. I'm done.
Aileen? You have to unmute.
There. Sorry.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. I was still in the other conversation about there are new commands that Yeshua gave. I really remember the one about committing adultery, that you just have to look and then you're sinning already, or it's just in your mind and you're sinning already. So it confirms what you're saying, that it's a expanding what the old covenant is about, or the Old Testament is. And then when Tigor asked a question about any suggestion or comments on the inner and outer showing of action of faith, it reminded me of the fruit of the Spirit. And that would truly be not just the inner, but the outer showing of it through patience and everything else. So so that's the two things. Thank you very much.
Well, there's a thinking of thinking about the ask or ideas that are coming to their mind. Tomorrow morning's topic is armor. And then this coming Monday is at 6 o'clock our time is the prayer warriors meeting. Alan?
Oh yeah, Tagore, when you were going through 1 John 2, in verse 10, there's kind of a bit of a surprising element here. He who loves his brother abides in the light, and there's no cause for stumbling in him. So we see this direct connection between those who love their brethren and not stumbling. It's kind of amazing, really, when you think about it, because none of us want to stumble. And the definition for this can include falling into sin, or falling away even, made to be offended. So isn't it interesting that he who loves his brother abides in the light, and there's not going to be any causation, you could say. There's nothing that would bring about a falling away, or a sin for him to fall into sin in this way. What do you think about the connection between not stumbling and loving your brother? Of course, the next verse talks about if you're hating your brother, you're going towards the darkness. So to stumble then would be to go into darkness. Anyway, I found that word stumbling in kind of intriguing. Maybe I'm the only one who found it intriguing. I don't know.
It's actually a very interesting way he's phrasing. Would that mean you would never stumble if you're agape loving your brother? Or the stumbling is restricted to those sins pertaining to the interpersonal relationships? I think it's very contextual. Let's go there. This is 1 John 2nd chapter, verse 10. He that loveth his brother, this is agape love, abideth in light, and there is none occasion of stumbling in him. But he that hateth his brother is in darkness, and walketh in darkness, and knoweth not whither he goes, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. So when you're blinded in your eyes, you would fall while you are walking. You don't know where you are going. But you are abiding in light, you pretty much see the way. So you don't stumble and fall. So it's in this context, I think he's saying it's a metaphorical way of saying walking well and are stumbling. The two aspects, two different aspects. They are related to light and darkness. And light and darkness are again related to agape love or hatred. So three concepts are separate from one another. In a physical way, in physical darkness that causing blindness, you grope in the darkness and you would stumble and fall. But if you have physical light in the way, you don't stumble and fall. So he's explaining spiritual in terms of some physical, walking in the physical way. So he's using lots of semyon, I think. But would that stumbling, was he referring to that you would never sin if you have agape love towards your brother? Probably not. You can stumble in other ways.
You might be corrected.
Uh,
Easier to get corrected.
But overall, it is a better position you are while you are walking in light and agape love towards your brother, because you see and less chances for stumbling. That's my 2 cents.
I'm just thinking about in the world that we live in, how much hatred has caused people to go blind and then to go into destruction.
That's right. That's very right.
And that people don't know naturally. The natural man doesn't know that his hatred is leading him down a path. He's just not aware of that. It's a psychological path, and it's a spiritually demonic path that he goes down. And he doesn't know that he's being blinded by it. He thinks that his hatred is justified and that his hatred is that he deserves to hate that person, and that he's entitled to be full of hatred for whether it's a person or a group of people. And he doesn't know that the blindness is going to destroy him. I was just trying to kind of see the practical aspect of that, the simplicity of it, that we can we can notice in the world that we live in.
Yeah. The world they don't even want you to have a better car, better house, better job, better promotion. They don't want anything better than yourself to others. How much less agape love? You want eternal life for somebody. I think he's mentioning the word brother. I think he's talking about our ecclesia. Within ecclesia also you can exhibit this behavior. You don't have any agape love towards this brother or sister. And you don't want eternal life for them. You're hating them. I think that, it's more in the context of ecclesia because he uses the word brother. You're right. The world has lots of this hatred. But it is not right for us in ecclesia to have this hatred towards one another.
So is he saying this because this is an issue? This is something that is noticed, and it's at a level where, hey, we gotta write this down in a general epistle. It's getting bad enough that we can't deal with it one-on-one. We have to write it down now and make it known that this is a problem.
Yeah, it's not. These are believed to be designed for wide circulation among all the churches. So it's a big problem, generic problem, widespread problem. It's not specific to Corinthians. It's not specific to Ephesians. You're right. It is a problem. He actually addresses some of these problems. What is that guy's name? Diotrephes or somebody who starts disfellowshipping others. He wants preeminence. But in next few verses, he addresses the world. The world has lust and pride. It's kind of hatred. I'm done.
Okay. John, and I'm going to step away for a minute or two. I'll be right back. So if someone else wants to speak, take turns. Be right back.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tagore. Talking about a brother. If you look in the Old Testament, I think David, wrote Psalms 139. It says, "Have I not hated them, O Lord, that hate thee, and wasted away because of thine enemies? I have hated them with perfect hatred, they that were counted my enemies. Prove me, O God, and know my heart. Examine me and know my paths, and see if there's any iniquity in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." So, talking about David, if he wrote this song, he's talking about hating them with perfect hatred, whatever perfect hatred is. But I think in that aspect, there's hatred. But as far as to a brother, I would agree with you, Tagore, that he's talking about a brother. And they define who, I think Christ, Jesus, he says, these are my brothers and my mother and my relative. So it defines who the brother is and who a neighbor is, I guess, or somebody outside of family. I'm done.
Thanks, John. In that psalm, probably was referring to persecutors or the enemies of God. So he's also counting them as his enemies.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. He's talking about, I have hated them, O Lord, that hate thee. So
Yeah.
he's saying that if you're an enemy of God, then you're my enemy, is what he's saying.
So there's no disagreement here, what John is writing. For brother, no such hatred is permitted for between
Yeah.
brothers and sisters in ecclesia.
Yeah, you're referring to the third letter of John, I think, with that fellow casting people out.
Yeah.
And so on. And if you read between the lines there, he's kind of telling them to replace that guy with one that he recommends.
They have to make these administrative decisions. Any other thoughts, insights into this new righteousness we are beginning to explore?
I'm back.
Okay. Nobody raised hands, so we are good. I think by the end, when we finish this epistles of John, probably we would have better grip on the new righteousness. It's difficult and it's new for us. So give it sufficient time.
Alan?
Yeah, I think going over the righteousness that by imputed or accounted, it says, is accounted to him as righteousness. Reinforcing that is going to help a lot because we come from a heritage of works-based righteousness, and we come out of a system that put a heavy emphasis on obedience and such a heavy emphasis on that, and little, if any, emphasis on righteousness by faith, that many people lived in a kind of a depressed state because they knew they weren't perfect. We're not perfect performers and perfect in works-based righteousness. We're just not perfect at it. And so many people didn't enter into the equation, the imputed righteousness, and they had less than happy lives. Let's put it that way. But it helps a lot because when we understand that because of our faith, we are viewed as righteous in his sight. And if we follow through with the works that prove the evidence of that faith, as Rahab did, as Abraham and Noah and all the rest, then we have a better balance. We see that there's faith and works that go together, and we don't have to fret and beat ourselves and become depressed because we're not perfect performers. Does that make sense? Because I believe a lot of people carried guilt because they weren't perfect. And I myself, okay, I have to add myself in that mix. Years ago, would carry the disappointment of sin, and rather than understanding the imputation of righteousness, I did not really get that part. It was a more difficult walk, put it that way. The day-to-day walk, what didn't have the joy in it that it could have, or the peace. We don't have peace with God because we're perfect performers, do we? Is that where our reconciliation comes from? Our atonement comes from? Because we're perfect in our performance and never making a misstep, never missing the mark? Is that where our righteousness really comes from? Well, no, not completely. It's first of all based in the initial thing, faith. So I think it helps a lot to understand the higher righteousness. The righteousness of God and what his son did is pasted upon you. You're wearing a tag on your shirt that says, my faith in him has made me righteous, and my actions show that I really do believe.
Yeah, it's a catch-22 kind of situation, Alan. Once you believe God, this imputed righteousness comes to you. But you have to believe that also. People don't believe that your God is calling you righteous, and you have already this imputed righteousness. You don't need to beat yourself with guilt. For that, you have to believe to begin with. And what God is saying is, I'm imputing my son's righteousness to you. That we don't believe because of various reasons, because we have half truth or quarter truth or 1/100th of a truth. But when we come to new righteousness, we have all truth. And this performance-based external works, heavy emphasis, was so wrong because we were not working upstream in our heart and mind, and we were not even thinking about the movements and motions of sin or righteousness. So when you have total picture, you know where to work and where to start, and you understand the gaps and the slippages. We were not told that. That's the problem. The new righteousness puts you in a very practical understanding, and how the blood of Christ covers you each time you sin. It's a beautiful relationship based righteousness with full of mercy, that is forgiveness, and full of imparting strength and encouraging with you. So you build relationship, also build your righteousness while you are falling and standing up again. That's part of the whole operation. But if you don't know that, the first time when you fail, you think it's a big disaster. It's not. It's part of the program, part of the training. How many times a child would fall before he learns to walk? That is fundamentally when you don't believe this new covenant righteousness. That's where the guilt and beating, self-beating that occurs, I think. Thank you, Alan. I'm done.
Dan?
Yeah, Alan, I think your last comments were exactly correct. For example, when in 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10, memory verses, know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit. And then there's a laundry list of characteristics. But verse 11, which somehow we never quoted when we read that, says, and such were some of you, but you are washed, you are sanctified, you are justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of our God. Somehow we never got to reading that verse, or Romans 8:1, which is a favorite of mine. There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. So you're right. We were very unbalanced in the works direction. I'm done.
Marlene?
Yeah, I think your comments, Alan, tie in with Rahab's lying, and God blessing her. And you look at how God hates lying. And, we do all kinds of sins, and yet God blesses us and works with us and teaches us, and we grow, and then he shows us things we need to be changing and so on. And, Rahab was in that same position. She was learning about God, and at that point was trusting God and believing in him. So I'm assuming that she would eventually learn, not to lie. And God says, I'm going to have mercy on who will I have mercy. And I've heard before that because of Rahab's example, that it's okay to lie to save a life. And it's like, well, then it's up to me to save this person. It's in my hands to save this person. God can't do it. It's got to be me. And so I have the excuse to lie here. I don't see that. It's like, there are so many things you can say to be truthful to save a person's life. And the example is, somebody's knocking at your door, coming after somebody that, like the Tutsis and all these other people in other countries where they're protecting people so they don't get killed by the authorities, knocking at your door to come and see if you're hiding anybody and lie to save them. It's like, there's so many things you can say without lying. For example, the one person that said, well, come and look, and the authorities walked away. So there's so many things you can do to speak truth, to put it in God's hands. And God says he hates lying. So let's go with that and try not to lie and to not be deceitful. That's one of the things he says, you won't be in the kingdom if you're deceitful. So I tend to stick with what God says to do. He hates it, and I should hate it also and strive to say the truth. I have failed and I have lied at times, and it's like, oh, this is not good. It's so easy to do, slip of the tongue or whatever. But we're supposed to strive to think and act like God, and he hates lying. So I would go with, let's do all you can to speak truth, or be willing to die.
John?
Yeah, I agree with Marlene that in the case of Rahab, it says, likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works when she had received the messengers and had them sent out another way. And don't say she was justified by works for lying. It says it was justified because she received the messengers and sent them out another way. I think Abraham lied too about it. I brought that up earlier about he denied that his wife was his wife and said it was his sister. A deception. I think that when you're put in that place, somebody knocking at your door, and I think I've heard that used when the Nazis looking for Jews. It was okay to lie to say they weren't there, but I think you've got to trust Christ and the Father that you won't be tested beyond your ability to resist. And it's not, you could use the old Jewish thing, answer a question with a question. Now, why would I have somebody here like that? I think, Marlene, you were referring to things like that. But lying's lying, and I don't think Rahab was blessed because she lied. I think she was blessed. James tells why she was blessed. I'm done.
Igor?
Yes, those are chief attributes of devil: murder and lying. Devil was called father of lies, lying. So if you're doing lying, you're probably doing works of devil, not works of God. But there are some internal works and internal movements were right up to that point for Rahab. And John also pointed out that she was justified by act of protecting spies and sending them out in another way. The Hebrews writer is very careful not to include her lying when he is describing the justification of her. So that's an interesting thing, John, you pointed out. Nowhere can we justify lying because it is the attribute of devil. He is father of lies, lying.
I'm not saying that I never did it. I'm like Paul. I fall down lots of times. But say your grandmother knit you a real nice, spent a lot of time on a sweater, but it was all kind of horrible colors. And she said, "Do you like my sweater that I knit you?" And try and get out of that one, without hurting her feelings. So I guess there's ways, but the first reaction is that, "Oh yeah, I love that sweater, Grandma." I won't wear it, but I love that sweater.
Dan?
Yeah, a couple of comments about lying. First, John, the sweater thing. I've been thinking about stuff like that for a long time, and I've often considered this answer to the person, which goes something like this. Well, that's a difficult question for me to answer, because if I say I don't like it, I know I'm going to hurt your feelings, but I'm afraid if I say I like it, you might think I'm just saying that. So I don't really know what to say. I've never had a chance to try that approach, but it might be interesting to see how it works. But the main comment I wanted to make about lying is most people think, and I think this is true, that in this life, the punishment you would receive for being a chronic liar is that nobody trusts you after a while, after they are familiar with your reputation. But I've heard it said that there's an additional level of punishment in this life for the chronic liar. He loses the ability to trust other people because he begins to unconsciously project his character flaw onto them, and he begins to assume everyone lies the way he does, so he can't trust anybody else, which is an interesting type of punishment to receive in this life for being a chronic liar. I'm done.
Well, I've got a little better at it. Oh, Grandma, it's just so wonderful. You spent all that time to think of me like that and really knit me a sweater. There's ways to get around it. I guess Marlene pointed that out. But sometimes you're caught flat-footed and you say things you shouldn't.
Marlene?
Yeah, I was just going to comment about what John had just said. There's other ways you can say things, and that was a perfect example of what else you could say. You don't have to answer the direct question. You can redirect. Do you like my dress? Well, it's like, and you think it's ugly, and they think it's beautiful. Well, you can say, well, I think the other dress is more becoming of you, or something. Or I said, you're really happy you like that dress, or something. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like, what's wrong with facing the truth and stating these things? It's like, well, face the truth sometimes.
Tagore, then Stan.
You can let Stan go first. Let them wrap up this topic. I have another topic.
All right, Stan, go ahead.
Marlene, I do like your comment very much about facing the truth sometimes, because every once in a while, I will talk to someone and I will say, I'll ask a question, and then I will say, now I really want to know how you feel about this. Don't be polite with me. I need to know how you really feel, which is me saying, okay, I want to face the truth right now. So I do like that comment that, and I agree with you 100%. Sometimes we simply do have to face the truth, even if it's not pleasant. I'm done.
Okay, Tagore.
Yes, hating the brother is something prophesied in Matthew 24. I'm just trying to find that verse. Brother would betray brother. Matthew 24. Because of the iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. This is agape love. Its context is church, agape love. So lawlessness would abound, anomia, and love of many shall wax cold. And before that, many shall be offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another. So hatred is prophesied to happen in church. And then they deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Maybe it's a Luke's or Mark's version. Brother would hate brother. Somewhere it is there. So what we are seeing in Epistles of John, that he who hates his brother is still in darkness. He doesn't know where he is going because darkness has blinded his eyes and he would surely stumble. But he who loves agape, loves his brother, is in light, and there is no occasion for him to stumble. If I find that verse, I will come back. But brother would hate brother is something I remember to be prophesied.
I think I'm going to call it a night, and it's an hour later over here. So really enjoyed the conversation tonight. Happy Sabbath to all of you. Good night.
All right, good night, John. Good to hear from you.
John, it's past the, when is your kidney stone address? I was thinking it was the 11th.
I got my kidney stone out Monday.
Oh, that's what I want to know.
Yeah, and right now I'm in recovery.
Oh,
It's not the most comfortable thing, that's for sure, but they got a stent in me, and that's this Thursday. They're going to take that out. So then I'll be a lot more comfortable, and probably the bleeding will stop then too.
oh, wow. So you're going through a lot. Did they cut up along your side, or they did it
No, they don't do that. They go up through your manly parts with a jackhammer and a TV camera. That's what it feels like anyway when they're done.
right? Yeah.
And so
Wow.
it was really bad for a couple of days, and now it seems to be, well, it's tolerable. I've not taken any pain meds. just an antibiotic. So, but I'll be sure happy to get rid of that stent. I'll tell you, it's about 10 inches or 12 inches long, and it goes between your kidney and your bladder.
Oh, 12 inches, so the whole length.
Yeah, up that tube,
Wow.
and it's always irritating, so it makes you bleed. So,
Oh, yeah, and when I had damage down that side from my kidney stone, I questioned why I had this referred pain on the inner thigh. And I was told by the doctor that that was what would you call it? Pain that you feel somewhere else. Referred pain or so if you get anything on the inside of your upper thigh, that's from damage inside that urethra.
yeah, it sure hurts when it moves, but it's gone now. They want me to catch any parts of it so they can analyze it, but
Oh, it just got broke up, so they did not get the stone itself.
no, they go in with a laser, I believe, and shatter it, and then it just gradually comes out.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah, and it can sit then. I had one that sat in the bladder. Once it was small like that, the bladder is a much larger opening. It doesn't hurt to come out of the bladder, but
Right.
it can sit there a while.
yeah, I don't. I had one about 8 years ago that was bigger, and
Wow.
so it's not anything new to me. So,
Yeah. Well, hugs and prayers for you.
okay, thank you very much for asking.
Best wishes, John. Hope everything goes well for your procedure.
Well, any other topics, comments, ideas, thoughts? Otherwise, we can all call it a night.
Here it's 11 o'clock already.
Yeah.
I think we have exhausted the